Welcome to the Zoe Routh Leadership Podcast, your source of strategies and insights to make you a better leader. Influence, improve, inspire.
Hi, this is Zoe Routh, and today we're interviewing Simon Waller. Simon is an author of 2 books, Analogosaurus, there we go, which is about avoiding extinction in a world of digital business and his second book, The Digital Champion, connecting the dots between people, work, and technology. Simon is also going to be one of my keynote speakers at the Edge of Leadership UnConference on the 23rd of March here in Canberra, because he is awesome and he is very sought after as a professional speaker, as you will soon hear. He also runs a fabulous program called the Digital Champions Club to help organizations identify and adopt the technology tools that can provide you with a competitive advantage. What we're talking about today is this notion of what we really need to be afraid of and how technology is changing society for better or for worse, and what we can do to deal with the challenges and implement them so that we have better employee engagement. Now, what you need to know is what happened when we recorded this show is that we had, ironically, all sorts of technological challenges in which resulted in me pressing record, which meant stopping the recording, and then me recognizing about 2 minutes into the whole shebang that we had not been recording. So we miss out on the first story with Simon. And we'll pick it up where he is in the middle of explaining the analysis from the book called Sapiens. And that book reference will be in the show notes, which will be at zoerouth.com/podcast/Simon Waller. And you'll get a reference to the book there, Sapiens. And in the book of Sapiens is the history of humanity. And Simon is telling us about the change in the agricultural revolution, where we thought this innovation of moving away from hunter-gatherer society to an agricultural one was going to be better for us. But in some cases, it was actually worse. It made us more susceptible to feast and famine. And that whole adaptation of technology without being aware of the possible pitfalls is something that is a hangover for us nowadays. So Simon leads us into that. But first, a little bit of the blooper, and then into the remainder. Okay, how's that?
I don't know. How is it?
I think it's better.
Okay, excellent.
I love how we're doing a session on technology and technology stuffs us up. It's perfect.
It's beautiful, right?
It is beautiful.
And it's kind of like it's such a simple version of what we were talking about before.
Yeah.
So therefore, should we just never use GoToWebinar? Should we instead just wait until I'm in Canberra next and do this face-to-face? But obviously not with a tape recorder, because that's obviously technology as well. We would just have to be able to memorize it, and then you'd share it one-on-one with anybody who might want to hear about it.
Yeah. Okay, mate. Are you ready? I'll hit record and we'll get into it.
Okay.
Yeah, though. And now on to the rest of the interview.
The law and order, the king and everything else we needed around that kind of city that allowed the farming to take place. So although we could probably argue that on a global scale we now produce enough food for everybody to be fed, the knock-on impact in terms of us now working harder for our quality of life, I think that's probably a legacy that may have been created back then that we're still dealing with now. And I kind of think that's probably a big message I kind of really try and drum into people, is that in our choices around the technology we use and how we use it, is this positively impacting our quality of life, or is it negative? And as a really simple example, we could look at things like, say, mobility. And, I remember starting my professional life at Rio Tinto and being given a BlackBerry, which was kind of the first example of us being able to take our work home with us, because we could access our email and our messages and our calendar and everything from wherever we were. Now, that, on one hand, is the opportunity for great flexibility. And now we could work from anywhere at any time we want. But instead of making that choice to have flexibility, what we've actually been lumped with is an expectation that we work everywhere and all the time. So in a sense, the outcome of it's been exploitation or potential for exploitation, as opposed to the opportunity, which is flexibility. And so, in each case, there is a choice for us to make about what's the quality of life that we want to have. And I understand as well that from an end user perspective, an employee in a large organisation, they may not feel that they always have that choice. They might feel that there's an expectation of working everywhere and all the time rather than when it suits you. But unless collectively we kind of start acknowledging that problem, that we shouldn't be exploiting our workers. Like, that's actually not probably a good long-term strategy for staff retention. But some way we need to kind of raise this in our consciousness that our choices about how we use the technology do impact our quality of life in the long term.
Do you think we're becoming more aware of that and paying more attention to it, or are we just bumbling along?
Well, if we kind of think about that mobility conversation, and the start of that kind of rooted back in around 2003, 2004 when the BlackBerry came out. So that's 13, 14 years ago now. And I would say if it's taken us 14 or 15 years to start having meaningful conversations about what are our expectations of people in terms of taking work home with them, which I think in a lot of organisations, those conversations are current conversations. They haven't been well addressed yet. Mm-hmm. If it's taken us 14 years to start having a meaningful conversation about what technology changed for us back in 2003, I think it's a bit of bumbling, to be honest. That doesn't feel like a really proactive and thoughtful and strategic approach to technology.
So what is a strategic, thoughtful, and proactive approach to tech? Have you got a formula in terms of, or a process in which to assess new tech and assessing opportunities and threats?
I think so much as a formula, but I think there's definitely some guidelines that we can put in place. You mentioned earlier on my kind of interest in things around kind of the fear that technology generates. And I kind of have a really, I think it's important to differentiate between fear, which is an informed concern about technology, and anxiety, which is an uninformed concern. Mm. And I think initially we operate from this state of anxiety. I don't understand this, but it feels increasingly inevitable and increasingly that's going to impact my life. But because I don't understand it, I avoid it. And I do believe that we have seen large amounts of avoidance around technology, especially, I think, in the first decade of this century. So from 2000 to 2010, I kind of point to the Y2K bug as an example of this, of how technology was really bad and how it was hard to get good advice. So I don't know if people remember the Y2K bug.
I totally do.
It used to be the computer systems only had 2 digits. Sorry, go.
Well, I was just going to explain what our response to that. So the Y2K bug, right? So you can explain the technical detail. When I was at Outward Bound, our response to the Y2K threat, perhaps this was anxiety, misinformed concern, is that we prepared a doomsday scenario. So we stocked up on supplies, we developed contingencies if everything crashed. So we were on red alert. And I think there was more than a few organizations who did the same, right?
Oh, it was huge. Like, it was massive. So I'll go just quickly into the technical bit of it. But so old computer systems, which were really short of memory, instead of using 4 digits to keep track of the year, they just used 2. So it wasn't 1996, it was just 96. And the concern was that once we actually rolled over the year 2000, computers wouldn't be able to distinguish between 1901 and 2001. And the impact of that was going to be quite potentially catastrophic, to the point that there was expectations that planes may fall out of the sky, that ATM machines might just start spitting out random amounts of money. And there was these concerns, like you have with Outward Bound, that we should all go and hide somewhere until this threat was over. The problem was, I remember this story. There was actually a in the US, they were kind of fairly comfortable that large organizations were going to be able to manage this, that they had the money to invest in potentially these kind of doomsday scenarios and fixing software and all the rest of it. But they started up this helpline for just small businesses who they thought may not be so well protected. And so I think January the 1st was actually it's a public holiday. But the first day this opened on a Tuesday, I think it was the 2nd. They had like 200 operators there ready to field all these calls, and they got 3 calls in the first day, and none of them had anything to do with the Y2K bug. You know, it was like our Excel program not working properly. Though, I think when we look at the cost of it around the world, it ran into billions and billions of dollars.
Right.
So billions of dollars was paid. I think, the estimate was about $300 billion in the US alone was spent on this. Yeah, $300 billion.
Wow.
And so I kind of think it's a great example of people feeling, damn, it's hard to get good advice around technology these days. You know what I mean? Like it was made up to be this big thing. A bunch of consultants obviously did incredibly well out of the Y2K bug, and it amounted to nothing.
Yeah.
So I kind of feel that there was a situation especially between 2000 and 2010 where the way that we approach technology in organisations was one of largely avoidance. We kind of started treating technology as a commodity, which means we buy it as cheap as we can, which means we don't have a lot of extra capacity for things like research and experimentation and trying new things. So when we started to see the introduction of things like mobility, of kind of cloud-based systems, we weren't actually doing anything about them. Organisations weren't doing anything about them. And so, even now, I run a program for small and medium-sized businesses around kind of exploring, identifying and implementing these kind of technology solutions. And I kind of remind them that the cloud, mobile, social-based solutions that we're implementing now, they're not cutting edge. They're at least a decade old. So I think that lack of experimentation is probably the first problem, because if we don't experiment, we don't learn. And if we don't learn, we continue to operate from a position of anxiety. Yeah. Not, as I said, not an informed fear, but from an uninformed anxiety. So I think I think having capacity where we support people in their experimentation is probably one of the first things we need to do, and do so proactively. I think initially we have a tendency to dismiss new technologies because it's easier and less effort to dismiss something to actually actively pursue it and find out what it's about. And we're also busy these days that we protect our time. But the problem is if we hold on to those stories and dismiss this stuff for too long, we find ourselves playing catch up. And I think that's a big problem with organisations at the moment.
Experimentation sounds expensive, especially when it comes to tech. So how do you encourage, like you say you work a lot with small to medium enterprises, do you encourage them to have a set amount of budget or percentage of their budget to spend on experimentation? Do you have guidelines around that or suggestions?
Yeah, I think that we need to shift our mindset from a cost focus to a value focus, to be honest. Mm-hmm. So with the projects that I would encourage people to do, I don't say, look, don't waste your time on anything that doesn't have a 10 times return on your investment in the first year. Mm-hmm. So if you're going to invest $2,000 in something, you should expect 20. If it doesn't give you 20, don't do it in the first year. If you spend $100,000, expect $1 million. If it doesn't give you $1 million in the first year, don't do it. So that is very much a value conversation, not a cost conversation. I think when you think about those types of returns, they're astronomical compared to what we might normally expect on, say, an infrastructure project. So if we get double-digit returns on an infrastructure project, we think we're doing really well. And we're talking about 1,000% per annum. So if we operate from a cost perspective, we won't do anything because this stuff costs money to do. So if we can always use our budget as an excuse for an action, to be honest.
Yeah.
My question is, though, is that if someone came to you, if you were a leader in an organisation and someone came to you with a proposition that says, I want to do this, it's going to cost $5,000, we expect a minimum of $50,000 return in the first year, would you back it?
Absolutely.
Would you give somebody the money to do it?
For sure.
Even if it wasn't in the budget. What if it wasn't in the budget? Would you find the money to do it?
Yeah.
Because you should. Like, whether you do or not, you should. Because there's very few opportunities in our organisations that will give us those types of returns. So even with the people that are part of this program, I say, look, to their sponsor, you need to carve out time for these people to be in this program. It can't be that they do the program in addition to their day job. It's got to be part of the job. But in return, tell me anything else these people are currently doing where if they were to commit 2 hours a week to it, they would generate a minimum of $100,000 back for your organisation for 2 hours a week.
Yeah, right. That's a great value proposition.
Exactly. And I think that's the thing we've got to start thinking about is that the opportunity around these technologies is astronomical. And if we want to find evidence of this, we actually need to go back to things like the Industrial Revolution. So if we go back to the Industrial Revolution, we saw the emergence of a new kind of class, like the industrialists. So the industrialists, like before the Industrial Revolution, most of the money was tied up in an aristocracy, so an inherited wealth. And then we see after the Industrial Revolution this incredible growth of new wealth in people who owned and ran the machinery of the Industrial Revolution. Now, their wealth is a fraction of the value that their machinery generated for society. And it has to be like that. In a capitalist society, you generate value or money if you create value for somebody else. Mm-hmm. It's no coincidence that we're seeing exactly the same thing happen again with this kind of emerging technologists. So you look at the growth, and I think it's now 6 of the top 10 companies in the world, biggest companies in the world, are technology companies. Mm. And that's come from nowhere in a period of about 30 years. So go back to pre-Microsoft, or early Microsoft in the 1980s, mid-1980s. In 30 years, we've gone from having no technology companies at the top as being the biggest companies in the world to now being dominated by them. Mm. That is a reflection of this incredible value that they are generating for other businesses and other people in society. And so we've got to see that somewhere in this incredible growth, there is opportunities for every business or every industry. No one's kind of immune from this change.
Absolutely. So no one is immune. I think that is true. And I think that sort of feeds into the huge fears, as we've been talking about, around technology. And you were sharing before we got on the line about some research that you read about they surveyed a number of different workers, and they discovered that some of the top fears, we've dropped, our fear of death has dropped to what did you say, number 39?
Number 47.
47.
Yeah, out of 88.
Out of 88.
Yeah, number 47 is, yeah.
And what were the top ones?
So this is really, I found this research really interesting. So first of all, I hope you can pick up very quickly. I'm quite happy at talking about the opportunity that technology presents, but also the genuine risks that it represents and the fears that it generates as well. Yeah. And in fact, my belief is that they're actually two sides of the same coin. Mm-hmm. But the research that you're pointing to, and it was done about 18 months or so ago in the US, and they surveyed 1,500 American adults as to what their greatest fears was. So they gave them a list of 88 fears, and they asked them to, on a 4-point scale of I'm not afraid to I'm very afraid, on each of these fears. And so when they did them, it turns out that 3 of the top 5 fears were technology related. So number 2 was cyber terrorism. Number 3 was not knowing what corporates do with my data. Number 5 was I don't know what the government does with my data. But in addition to those, robotics, artificial intelligence, losing my job to robotics, losing my job to artificial intelligence, all came in before death as being our fears.
It's amazing.
I kind of, we talk about, I keep saying that difference between anxiety and fear. Yeah. I actually think that what people are here are listing are not their fears, but their anxieties.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't think that people necessarily have a really informed understanding of the risk associated with cyber terrorism or even its impact. And I think the same for a lot of those technologies. I don't really understand the risks of what the governments are doing with my data. I don't understand the impact of that. But there's a sense of inevitableness to it. So I know these things are happening. I know these things can actually no longer be avoided. And so we have this sense of anxiety, which might be mislabeled as fear, around those things. But it's interesting that, as I said, that death comes in at 47. Mm. And the way I can only explain that is that although there is an inevitableness about death, there is a sense that we control death on a daily basis. So we don't control death necessarily when we kind of get into our 60s, 70s, But on a daily basis, we know not to cross the road in front of a car. We know not to drink, laundry liquid. There's a whole bunch of decisions that we know how to manage on a daily basis that allow us to avoid death. And I don't think we necessarily have that same sense of control over technology, especially these emerging technologies. It's interesting, on that list of technologies that we fear, there isn't things like Wi-Fi. We've kind of come to terms with Wi-Fi now. Though early on there was some massive fear around Wi-Fi, we don't have CRT television sets on there anymore. There was a fear about, remember that advice you used to get when you were a kid, don't sit too close to the television? And it was based on a piece of research that the production of X-rays from television CRT sets may be damaging to our eyes if we sit too close. But after that, CRT TVs, they changed the design of them so they didn't actually produce those X-rays. Yet we still got the same advice 25, 30 years later. And steam trains don't appear on the list. And I was mentioning to you before that when steam trains first, which again is another type of technology that we have come quite accustomed to, but when steam trains first came out, there was really concerns that our bodies were going to explode because they would be used to travelling so fast. We were only made to travel as fast as a horse, and a steam train could go faster than a horse. And what happens when we go faster is our bodies just may not be able to take it and just completely explode. So it's interesting that the fears we have are not about technology per se, it's about technology that is increasingly inevitable that we don't understand. And again, going to the point about experimentation, experimentation is our answer to not understanding. We have to try small things to actually build our understanding. I strongly believe that the only way we will understand is a learn by doing approach. And so the experimentation is kind of the safe doing.
So given that, like some of these major emerging tech, such as AI and robots, do we need to take an experimentation approach to that, or are there some broader technological trends that are genuine risks? Where do you sit with that?
Oh, I think all technologies are a genuine risk.
Okay.
And I suppose the analogy I give is that an abundance of anything is bad for you. So we depend on oxygen to survive, but too much oxygen will kill you. We depend on water to survive, but too much water will kill you. So even the best things in our world will kill us if we don't have them in some form of moderation. And I think it's the same with any type of technology. If we kind of look at our big concerns that we have around technology, they're often the shadow of actually an incredible positive. So if we look at that list that kind of came up in that research around fear, one of those ones is our fear around kind of privacy, or what's the government doing with our data? But that sense of perhaps manipulation is the shadow of personalization. We've given people this information because we want a more personalized online experience. But in that sense of personalization, we open ourselves up to manipulation. We can look at, for instance, the examples around artificial intelligence and robotics about making our work easier. Taking away either the manual labor, as we saw in things like the industrialization of society, but increasingly some of our low-value cognitive work when we talk about artificial intelligence. But that ease comes with a shadow, which is that we lose control. And we can always see these shadows in things. I mentioned before, the flexibility provided by, say, mobile technology. The flip side of that is a risk that we become exploited. Either exploited because we now can be expected to work for free outside of normal business hours, or on a grander scale, if we can actually make our job flexible and can now effectively work from home, why don't we just outsource the job to the Philippines anyway? Because if we don't need to be physically present, we can actually just go and shift the work completely. So I don't want to say that any one of these technologies that we have or we have concerns about, for every concern, there's a flipped opportunity, and for every opportunity, there's a flipped concern. Yep.
So I'm interested next in the impact on people's experience at work. So how does this affect this whole risk, threat, concerns, and anxiety? How does it affect people in the workplace in terms of employee engagement and employee loyalty?
Yeah, so I reckon this is really interesting because I'm really interested in why we find ourselves in this current situation that we're in. And I feel the current situation that a lot of organisations are in is this feeling a need to play catch up around technology. So one of our good friends, Pat Hollingworth, one of the questions he loves to ask an audience when he speaks and does his keynotes is just put up your hand, anybody here who currently is going through some form of digital transformation in their organisation. And if you ask that question of any audience, at the moment it's about 70% or more people put up their hands.
Really?
Yeah, it's a huge thing, especially look at this within government. I speak often to government audiences in some of my keynotes, and it's a big thing in government at the moment, but it's happened all through organisations. And to me, transformation is a response, is actually playing catch up. So if we're smart about technology, we evolve. Transformation is a fundamental redesign of our organisation in response to the fact that if we don't do it, we may not survive. It is a drastic response. And that response that we're having at the moment is a result of the fact that for the last decade, this stuff has been brewing, that we actually probably haven't acted enough. And I think that this has put our people in quite a difficult situation, because over the last decade, we haven't really encouraged them or supported them in being proactive around their uptake of technology. We haven't supported them in helping identify solutions that make their job easier or better. We've said, look, no, we've got this IT department. That's their job. They'll make the decisions on behalf of everybody, and you'll just use what you're told to use. So for a long time, we've trained people to not be proactive, and now we're implementing this technology really quickly, and they're struggling to keep up. So there's growing sense of overwhelm. And I think in that overwhelm, and I've had meetings with clients recently where their big frustration is we're rolling out this technology and the adoption rate is really low. Yet on the other hand, we're being also told that the technology that we had beforehand was so old school that people have better technology at home. And the thing is, both those things are true, but when we're now trying to overload people, we start operating from this position of anxiety and fear. And we need to be able to support people from that position into some sense of experimentation. And for people to act and for people to move, they have to honestly feel that the value to them individually, not the value to the organisation, but the value to them as an individual is greater than the cost. They've got to feel that the experimentation is worthwhile, even just giving it a shot. I don't think necessarily organisations do a very good job of selling their technology solutions to the end user. They operate from a perspective that says, we're paying you, you don't have a choice, you'll do what you're told. But the truth is people always have a choice. The first choice is, I'll make it look like I'm using it when you're watching me, but I'll stop using it when you're not. This very active avoidance of technology. It's kind of funny that almost everyone laughs whenever I say that, and I only assume that they're laughing because they know it's true.
I'm just imagining that, like the boss walks down the corridor and all the workers press the little dot on their computer screen, which brings up the technology that they should be working on. And when the boss walks past, they shrink it down again. That's what I'm laughing at. It's just that covert avoidance that people may be implementing.
Have you been onto the lastminute.com, the travel website recently?
No.
There's a big button in the corner. It says the boss is coming.
That's awesome.
And so while you're searching for flights for your next holiday, while you're being proactively disengaged, and the boss is coming, just click the button and it brings up a page that looks like you're doing a word processing document.
That is hysterical. And so sad if people are using that.
Completely. I was amazed when I saw it myself. I just said the other day, I had no one to hide it from. It was just me. But we have this there is that active avoidance, and the second choice is that I'll just do whatever. I'll find some other technologies that's not what you gave me because I actually know there's other things out there anyway. Yeah. So this whole thing around shadow IT is we introduce new systems that haven't been improved by the business, but it's increasingly hard for us to regulate. Because these days, so much of the technology we want is web-based, which means all I need is access to a website and credit card and I can get whatever I want. But the third and perhaps the most drastic choice is people just leave.
Yeah.
And I think that that's actually, when we talk about staff retention, I think that statistics say that when people don't get given the technology that they feel they need to do their job, they're something like twice as likely to leave your organisation in the next 3 years as in organisations where people feel satisfied with their technology.
Absolutely. And Jacob Morgan, in his book, The Employee Experience, listed technology as one of the 3 major things that's required to help people feel satisfied at work. So having the right technology they need to do their job is one of them. 2 is physical environment. And the third one is workplace culture. And so I think we can't underestimate how important getting the right tech, up-to-date tech, and helping people adjust and adapt to it is really, really significant for employee engagement and retention, let alone getting the work done itself.
I think it's interesting. I reckon we're probably getting better now at giving people the right tech. I don't think we're necessarily doing a great job yet of engaging with them to use it. So I think that's probably the big gap. And I think, again, why are we experiencing this is I don't think historically that's been anybody's job. So IT's job is to roll out the technology, to flick the switch, make sure it's on and everybody can access it.
Yeah.
That's their job. It's not their job to train people on how to use it. But then it kind of hasn't been somebody else's job either. Like, does that fall with learning development? How well has learning in the past? Learning development might have run the odd, introduction or advanced Excel courses, but they haven't necessarily been proactively engaged in the rollout of new solutions. But I think fundamentally, as I said, I've seen it a lot at the moment, is that the way that we message and engage people around the new technology, and especially in terms of the what's in it for them as opposed to what's in it for us as an organisation, I think has been done pretty poorly at the moment. And that's a lot of the work. When I work with organisations, we do a process around kind of identifying potential opportunities, investigating them to make sure that they're actually a good fit for the organisation and implementing them. A big part of the investigation is engaging with end users and finding out their deepest, darkest problems. What's the stuff that really annoys them, that really frustrates them? Because they're the triggers that will actually help them act. If we can identify the things that they feel are such massive costs to them in their daily work life, and you offer a solution that makes their lives better, then they're interested because they can see the value proposition of action. But the value proposition of action is says, like, I just want you to use the new CRM system. That's actually, so what? And actually, that's the great question to ask, is if you think you found the problem that you're solving, just ask yourself, so what? Who cares? And keep going until you find something that people genuinely care about. Because without that care, we're just not going to build the engagement.
Yeah, that's right. So, because I think people implementing the solution or making the decision to implement the solution feel like they've done all the rigorous thinking around it, and therefore other people should just pick up their decision and run with it. And they haven't got buy-in as a result, which is what you're talking about, sell the value of doing this change. So,
I think also we've got very different perspective. If we think about the existing relationship between people in IT or technology-related fields and people in operational roles, there's quite a divide, to be honest, between them.
Yeah.
So there's a divide that comes with language. So they use different languages. There's a divide that comes often geographically. So, we jokingly talk about putting IT departments in the basement, but it genuinely happens. Like, it does genuinely happen.
Why do they put them in the basement?
Sometimes they put because they're not necessarily valued, to be honest.
Okay.
So IT was a thing that came in late into organisations, and initially the cost of IT was high and the returns were low, whereas now it's very much flipped. The returns are incredibly high and the costs are increasingly low. But that was where they got put. And we didn't really feel that we needed to see them necessarily. But even worse than that, in this kind of commoditisation of IT, we often shifted them out of the organisation altogether and insourced IT support.
Yep.
Or we just shifted them overseas completely, and then we never had to see them face-to-face at all. But there's a genuine geographical divide. I think there's a respect divide as well. I used to work at Rio Tinto, and I was in for a while, the role I was in sat under procurement. And procurement has the same problem as IT does, is that as far as everyone else is concerned, they're just a cost. They're almost like a parasite on the business.
Right.
They go like, I could buy stuff myself. Why do I necessarily need to buy things with you? So I think IT has that respect problem as well, unfortunately. So you've got all these divides that sit between the operations and the business. The operations have the problems. IT people have potential solutions, but the level of engagement between the two is so low that we don't connect the dots. And even when we find the solution, so we do the kind of the whole, we start to kind of gather the research and we build the scope of work and we roll out the new CRM system. The whole framing, as you said, Zoe, like the whole framing from the IT perspective is different from the end user. The IT person's thinking about functionality, what the technology does. They're not thinking about the problems it solves for people. So even when we train people on it, we train people on the functionality of the technology as opposed to bundling up that functionality into problems that mean something to people.
So what I'm hearing is, and my experience of IT, the IT staff in an organization, is that their role has been one of rescuer. And I remember this, anytime something goes wrong, you call the IT guy. And normally it's an IT guy, not a gal, though that's changed quite a lot. And the IT guy will come and sort you out because you just run into a roadblock of, I don't know any more about this particular thing. I throw my hands up in the air and IT guy comes and magically clicks here, clicks there and sorts it. And all those divides are reemphasized, the language, the experience, they live it in a different planet. And I think that, in the basement, like some crazy, trolls down the bottom. And what I'm hearing you say is that role, that identity needs to radically shift from rescuer to educator. Is that how you would describe their role? How would you describe what the IT department or IT person needs to shift to?
Yeah, so I think that when you talk about rescue, it's a very reactive role. It has been a very reactive role, as opposed to being a proactive one. I think a lot of IT departments would tell you that they don't have the resourcing required to be proactive, that we still kind of have a cost approach to IT rather than a value approach to IT. So that's the first big problem. I actually think that the truth is, I'm obviously coming along to do the Edge of Leadership conference in about a month's time. And the keynote I'm doing there, which is called The Opportunities Are in the Cracks, the alternate title for it is Why the IT Department Needs to Die.
Okay.
And it's
That's a bit harsh, Simon.
It's not IT people per se that need to die. It's the department model that needs to die.
Okay.
The fact that we bundle these people up into a small group and stick them in a different part of the organisation, that's the bit that has to die. We have to find a way of infusing this IT and digital knowledge throughout the organisation. We need to create greater connection between people in IT and in operations. We also need to acknowledge that there actually is, across our organisation, outside of the IT department, a whole bunch of quite technology-savvy people. There are people right now who are buying their own devices, investing in their own technology at home, set up their own Wi-Fi networks, being in charge of their own security. They're actually investing in their own skill development and knowledge development outside of work hours. They're doing all this stuff, and yet we're bringing them into the organisation and telling them they should have no say whatsoever in the types of technologies they should use. I think it's actually that resource that we need to tap. We need to be getting our IT people to be working with those tech-savvy people in our operational part of the business and building these connections. So getting them to work on little projects together, like value-adding projects, where in working on the projects, they build skill and knowledge, they build connection and understanding, and they deliver value back to the organisation. Like if you could role model that type of a program or that type of environment, and that can start to snowball, well, then you're going to start to get people more prepared for what's coming next. So every time we do a technology project, we actually build people's skills. Every time you show them an app or an interface or a new screen, often it's a transferable piece of information that they can use on the next project and the next project. Every time we deliver value to them by improving their life just a little bit through a technology project, we make them more excited about the next one. And the reality of it is that there is no possible future where in 5 years' time we don't have much more technology than we have right now. And I think that's the thing that we've got to get our heads around, is that this is not it. This is not the environment we deal with in the future. We have much more technology to deal with than we have right now. And we don't even know what some of those things are yet. So we need to be on a trajectory where we're starting to create a more digital culture in our organizations. We have no choice.
Yeah.
And, our choice to disengage doesn't protect us. It means that we just miss out on the benefits, but we still incur all the costs. So our choice not to engage with mobile technology doesn't protect us from exploitation and jobs being exported overseas. It just means that we miss out on the quality of life benefits of being able to work where and where we want. In fact, it's actually through engagement and that value that we build our understanding, which means we're more likely to be able to avoid the risks. So the things that we should genuinely fear as opposed to the things that just make us anxious. So I kind of feel like as an organisation that we really need to step up our game, not necessarily in just the rollout of technology, but more in how we actually engage with people and start to build a culture where people are genuinely desiring these technology solutions and we're having mature conversations about where it takes us.
That's beautiful. I love the potential of this too, because what I'm imagining as you're talking about this change of culture, this change of approach to using tech or experimenting with technology and doing it as a collaborative way, is that will further enhance that sense of innovation and experimentation more broadly across the organization, so that you have less the automaton, how do you pronounce that word? Sense of workers coming to work and just doing their job, whatever process that is, and that their entire work structure becomes one of discovery, one of creation, and one of being proactive as opposed to reactive. And that's a future I can get behind. I think that's great.
Yeah, it's funny when you say that. When I was working at Rio Tinto, I used to be a lean coach, so lean business improvement methodology, which is kind of the one that's been, I suppose, pioneered or developed by Toyota. So it's also known as the Toyota manufacturing system. Mm-hmm. But one of the things about lean, which I love, and I love to this day, is how it engages everybody in change. So in Toyota, if you go to the production line in Toyota, anybody can stop the production line for quality. Anybody can stop the whole production line if they're concerned about quality. And I think that empowerment of people means that they're actually far more engaged in their job and they love their job more. And I had a very real experience of that when I was working with Rio, and I was kind of managing this entire retreading facility where we introduced lean as a kind of business improvement approach. But the impact it had on the culture of that organization was incredible. Like before that, we had high staff turnover, massive problems around absenteeism. And after lean, we almost reduced it to zero staff turnover, no absenteeism. It was incredible what this did in 18 months. But if we parallel that, and to this idea of technology, how do we encourage people to have a proactive role in the technology they get to use to be part of that business improvement? Then we're actually creating a far more engaged, a far more effective and motivated workforce. Yeah. People will just love their jobs more. So that to me, I find that very exciting. And a lot of the work I do within my programs is still modeled on lean. Mm-hmm. It's still modeled on this idea that making lots of little changes or lots of little improvements and engaging people directly in those changes is actually the best way of creating this cultural shift.
That's perfect. I think that's a great way to end this wonderful conversation. I'm having so much fun, I don't want to. It's been just fabulous. And I'm really excited that I get to hear more of you at the Edge of Leadership UnConference 23rd of March, and you come to our beautiful city of Canberra. And attendees will get a chance to meet you live and in person and to spend a bit more time with you, both in your keynote and during the open space component, where they can take their individual questions and concerns and workshop that with you and the others. So
I'm really looking forward to it, actually. I'm really looking forward to it, Zoe. I think it's a beautiful structure. I love the UnConference approach. And I think, when you start to talk about these types of questions and these emerging kind of challenges, it's such an effective way of people being able to engage. And so, I'm so excited about it. So excited.
Oh, that's good. Well, it's only a few weeks away now. So in the meantime, thank you so much for your wisdom and your insight and the great showcasing you did of what's possible for us with technology and employee engagement. I really appreciate it. Thanks, Simon.
Thank you so much for having me, Zoe.